Marcus Chen adjusted his worn baseball cap one more time, checking his reflection in the coffee shop window. The faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and threadbare jacket told a story of financial struggle that couldn't be further from the truth. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with notifications from his assistant about board meetings and million-dollar deals. But tonight he was just Mark, a guy trying to meet someone genuine. What he didn't expect was for a 12-year-old genius to see right through his carefully constructed facade and change everything he thought he knew about honesty, family, and what it really means to be wealthy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Rosewood Cafe with the kind of persistence that made people want to stay inside forever. Steam rose from coffee cups like small prayers, and the scent of cinnamon pastries wrapped around conversations that ranged from whispered secrets to hearty laughter. Outside, the streets of downtown Millbrook gleamed under streetlights, reflecting the golden glow of a town that had somehow managed to keep its soul despite the encroaching development. Marcus Chen sat in the back corner booth, his fingers nervously drumming against the scratched wooden table. At 38, he had commanded boardrooms, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, and built a tech empire from nothing more than a laptop and an idea. But right now, dressed in clothes he'd borrowed from his groundskeeper, he felt like a teenager on his first date. The disguise had seemed brilliant 3 weeks ago when his sister Emma had cornered him at their mother's birthday dinner. She'd waved her phone in his face, showing him a dating profile she'd created without his permission, complete with photos she'd somehow acquired of him looking relaxed and genuine instead of the polished CEO shots that dominated business magazines. "You're going to die alone in that glass tower of yours," Emma had declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd successfully raised 3 children while running her own nonprofit. "When was the last time you went on a date with someone who didn't know your net worth before they knew your middle name?" Marcus had protested, listing all the perfectly reasonable explanations for why his romantic life had become as barren as his penthouse's minimalist decor. He was busy building something meaningful. He was focused on his company's expansion into sustainable technology. He was still getting over his divorce from Clarissa, even though that had been finalized 3 years ago. Emma had rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair that only younger sisters could master. "Clarissa left because she fell in love with your bank account, not you. And when she realized that money couldn't fill the emotional void where your personality used to be, she found someone who actually talked to her about something other than quarterly projections." The words had stung because they held more truth than Marcus cared to admit. Clarissa had been beautiful, sophisticated, and perfectly suited for the role of a CEO's wife. She'd looked stunning at charity galas and had never once complained about his 70-hour work weeks. But somewhere in the midst of building his empire, he'd forgotten how to be human, and she'd forgotten why she'd married him in the first place. So here he sat, wearing clothes that probably cost less than what he typically spent on lunch, waiting for someone named Sarah Mitchell, who thought he was a struggling freelance graphic designer living in a studio apartment across town. The profile Emma had created painted a picture of a man who was creative, humble, and financially challenged but rich in character. It wasn't entirely false, Marcus reasoned. He had started as a graphic designer, and before his first company had sold for 8 figures, he'd definitely known what it felt like to count every dollar. The cafe door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see a woman scanning the room with the careful attention of someone who'd been disappointed before. Sarah Mitchell was nothing like the women he usually dated. Where Clarissa had been all sharp angles and designer everything, Sarah moved with a soft confidence that spoke of someone comfortable in her own skin. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a simple green sweater that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. She looked like the kind of person who read books for pleasure and knew the names of her neighbors, But it was the girl beside her that made Marcus do a double take. The child couldn't have been more than 12, with the same auburn hair as her mother and eyes that seemed to take in everything with an intensity that was both charming and slightly unsettling. She wore a navy blue dress with small white flowers and carried herself with the poise of someone much older. Sarah spotted him and approached with an apologetic smile. "Marcus, I'm so sorry I'm late. And I know this is unusual, but this is my daughter Luna. My babysitter got sick at the last minute, and I couldn't find anyone else on such short notice." Marcus stood, extending his hand with what he hoped was an understanding smile. "No problem at all. Nice to meet you, Sarah. And hello there, Luna." Luna studied his outstretched hand for a moment before taking it with a firm grip that would have impressed any business executive. "Bonjour, Monsieur Marcus. Maman m'a dit que vous êtes graphiste. C'est un métier très créatif." Marcus blinked. His high school French, rusty but functional enough to understand that she just greeted him in French and commented on his supposed profession. Oui, merci beaucoup." Sarah laughed, a sound that was both embarrassed and proud. "Luna, English please. Not everyone speaks French." "Actually," Luna said, switching languages seamlessly, "I was just being polite. In France, it's considered good manners to greet someone in their native language, but since we're in America, English is more appropriate." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Though your accent suggests you might be more comfortable with Mandarin. Your surname is Chen, after all." Marcus felt his carefully constructed persona begin to crack around the edges. Most adults didn't pick up on linguistic subtleties with such precision, let alone children. "I do speak some Mandarin," he admitted carefully. "My parents emigrated from Taiwan when I was very young." "Taiwan," Luna said, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest. "The voice you selected does not support this language. Please click the upper right corner to switch to another voice." Trusting himself to maintain his cover story in a language that might reveal more about his background than he intended, Sarah slid into the booth across from him, gently pulling Luna down beside her. "I apologize for my daughter. She has a gift for languages, but sometimes she forgets that not everyone appreciates being linguistically analyzed upon first meeting." "How many languages does she speak?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious now. Luna perked up, clearly pleased to be asked directly. 7 fluently, 3 conversationally. English, French, Mandarin, Spanish, Italian, German, Japanese plus some. Russian, Portuguese, and Arabic. "I'm working on Korean and Hindi, but they're proving more challenging than I anticipated." Marcus stared at the child, his mind racing. He'd met Harvard linguistics professors with less impressive language skills. "That's remarkable. How old are you, Luna?" 12. I'll be 13 in January." She paused, studying his face with that unnerving intensity again. "You seem surprised." "Most people are. Mammon says it's because they're not used to children who read voraciously and have access to language learning applications." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "Luna is homeschooled. It gives her more flexibility to pursue her interests." "And what are your interests?" Marcus asked Luna, finding himself genuinely engaged despite the complication her presence added to his evening. Luna's face brightened. Linguistics, obviously, but also computer programming, international relations, and sustainable architecture. "I'm particularly interested in how language shapes cultural understanding and economic development in emerging markets." Marcus nearly choked on the sip of coffee he'd just taken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This 12-year-old was discussing topics that came up in his board meetings. "Sustainable architecture is fascinating," he managed. "What draws you to that specifically?" "Well," Luna said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone who Rarely got to discuss her passions with adults who took her seriously. I think the future of urban development lies in buildings that don't just avoid harming the environment, but actually improve it. Imagine structures that purify air, generate more energy than they consume, and create ecosystems that support biodiversity. Sarah watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. Luna, maybe we should order something to eat before we dive into your theories about urban planning. But Marcus was captivated. No, please continue. Have you looked into any specific technologies that might make that possible? Luna's eyes sparkled. Oh yes, bio-integrated materials, vertical farming systems, atmospheric water generation, smart glass that adjusts transparency based on solar load. There's this company called Chen Technologies that's doing incredible work with sustainable building integration. Their CEO is brilliant, even if he does seem a bit reclusive. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Luna was discussing his company, his work, his vision for sustainable development. The same vision that had driven him to sink millions into research and development, while his board questioned the profitability of environmental consciousness. You know about Chen Technologies? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Of course, Luna said, as if it were obvious. They're revolutionizing how we think about corporate environmental responsibility. Their smart building technology could reduce urban energy consumption by 30% while actually improving air quality. It's exactly the kind of innovation we need if we're going to address climate change at scale. Sarah looked between them with growing confusion. I had no idea you were interested in technology companies, Marcus. I thought graphic design was more about creativity than corporate innovation. Marcus felt sweat beginning to form under his borrowed baseball cap. I try to stay informed about developments that might affect design trends. Sustainable architecture is becoming a big influence in visual communications. Luna tilted her head again, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling of being studied by someone far more perceptive than her age should allow. That's interesting. Most graphic designers I've met focus more on aesthetic theory and brand development. You seem to have an unusually deep understanding of the technical implementation side. Luna, Sarah said gently, maybe we should let Marcus ask some questions too. This is supposed to be a conversation, not an interview. But Marcus found himself drawn deeper into the discussion, despite the danger it posed to his cover. What made you interested in Chen Technology specifically? There are lots of companies working on sustainable tech. Luna's expression grew more serious. Because they're not just talking about making money while appearing environmentally conscious. Look at their patent filings, their research partnerships with universities, the way they've structured their corporate governance to prioritize long-term environmental impact over short-term profits. Most companies that talk about sustainability are really just engaging in greenwashing. Chen Technologies is actually doing the work. Marcus stared at this remarkable child who understood his business better than some of his own board members. You've read their patent filings? Well, the publicly available ones. I'm particularly interested in their atmospheric processing technology. If they can scale it effectively, it could be integrated into urban infrastructure to create cities that actually improve air quality instead of degrading it. Sarah was looking increasingly bewildered. Honey, how do you even know about patent filings? Luna shrugged. The USPTO database is publicly accessible. I was researching sustainable technology for a paper I'm writing about the intersection of environmental science and economic development. A paper? Marcus asked. I'm applying for early admission to MIT's environmental engineering program. I know I'm young, but I've already completed most college-level coursework through online programs, and I think I could contribute meaningfully to their research. Marcus sat back in his chair, stunned. This child was applying to MIT at 12 and discussing his company's technology with more insight than most of his investors. That's incredibly impressive, Luna. Your parents must be very proud. Something flickered across Sarah's face, and Luna's expression grew more guarded. "It's just Mom and me," Luna said quietly. "Dad died when I was 8. The weight of that simple statement settled over the table like a blanket. Marcus felt his chest tighten, remembering his own father's death when he was in college and how it had driven him to build something lasting, something that would matter. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "That must have been very difficult." Sarah reached over to squeeze Luna's hand. "We've been a team ever since. Luna keeps me on my toes intellectually, and I try to make sure she remembers to be a kid sometimes." Luna smiled at her mother with obvious affection. "Maman worries that I'm too serious. She makes me watch Disney movies and insists I learn to bake cookies instead of just reading about food chemistry." "Food chemistry?" Marcus asked, grateful for the shift to lighter territory. "It's fascinating," Luna said, her enthusiasm returning. "The Maillard reaction alone involves hundreds of different chemical compounds that create flavor and aroma. But Maman says there's more to cooking than understanding the science behind it." Sarah laughed. "I've been trying to teach her that. Sometimes you have to feel your way through a recipe instead of calculating the exact molecular interactions." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, realizing they'd been talking for nearly an hour without ordering anything, "should we get some food? I hear the pasta here is excellent." As they looked over the menus, Marcus found himself studying Sarah more carefully. She had the kind of natural beauty that didn't rely on expensive cosmetics or designer clothes. Her hands showed the practical calluses of someone who worked with them, and she wore a simple silver watch that looked like it had been a meaningful gift rather than a status symbol. "What do you do for work, Sarah?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation toward safer ground. "I'm a nurse at Millbrook General," she said. "Pediatric oncology." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. "That must be incredibly challenging." Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "It is. But it's also the most meaningful work I've ever done. These kids are facing impossible situations with more courage than most adults could manage. They remind me every day what really matters." Luna looked up from her menu. "Maman says her patients taught her that resilience isn't about avoiding difficult emotions. It's about feeling them fully and choosing hope anyway." "That's very wise," Marcus said, and meant it, both of you. The waitress came to take their orders, and Marcus was struck by how naturally Sarah interacted with her, asking about her evening and remembering details from previous visits. This was clearly a regular spot for them, somewhere they felt welcomed and known. "So what kind of graphic design do you do?" Sarah asked once they'd ordered. "Corporate work or more creative projects?" Marcus felt the familiar knot of deception tighten in his stomach. "A bit of both," he said carefully. "I work with some larger companies on brand development, but I also do smaller projects for local businesses. It depends on what's available." Luna was studying him again with that penetrating gaze. Brand development for larger companies must require significant understanding of corporate strategy and market positioning. "Do you work directly with executives or primarily through marketing departments?" The question was innocent enough, but something in Luna's tone suggested it wasn't casual curiosity. Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that he was being tested, though he couldn't imagine why a 12-year-old would be suspicious of his cover story. "Usually through marketing departments," he said. "Though sometimes I do get to present concepts to higher-level executives." "That's interesting," Luna said thoughtfully. "I imagine there's quite a difference between designing for companies that are genuinely committed to their stated values versus those that are more focused on appearance than substance." Marcus nearly laughed despite his nervousness. This child was asking him questions that business journalists had been trying to get him to answer for years. "How can you tell the difference?" Luna's eyes sparkled with intellectual excitement. "Well, you look at the consistency between their public messaging and their actual business practices. Take Chen Technologies again. Their visual branding is relatively understated compared to their technological achievements, which suggests they're more focused on substance than image. Compare that to companies that spend millions on flashy advertising while their actual products or services don't live up to the marketing. Sarah was watching this exchange with obvious pride mixed with slight embarrassment. Luna, not everyone, wants to discuss corporate ethics over dinner. Actually, I find it fascinating, Marcus said, and realized he meant it. When was the last time someone had analyzed his company's branding choices and concluded that they reflected substance over image? Most business commentators criticize his marketing department for being too subtle, too focused on educating consumers rather than dazzling them. Do you think visual design has a responsibility to reflect deeper values? Luna continued. Or is it just about creating effective communication, regardless of what's being communicated? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think the best design work happens when there's authentic alignment between the visual message and the underlying reality. When that's missing, the design might be technically proficient, but it lacks integrity. Luna nodded approvingly. Exactly, which is why I think Chen Technology's approach is so smart. Their branding feels confident without being arrogant, innovative without being flashy. It suggests a company that's secure enough in their actual achievements that they don't need to oversell themselves. Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. This remarkable child had understood something about his company's identity that his own marketing consultants had struggled to articulate. You really have studied them closely. Well, when you're interested in sustainable technology, you pay attention to the companies that are actually making progress instead of just talking about it. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate. Marcus learned that Sarah had moved to Millbrook 5 years ago for the job at the hospital, that she'd grown up in a small town in Vermont, and that she'd met Luna's father while they were both studying at the University of Vermont. Luna had been born when Sarah was just 24, and they'd built a life together that was rich in intellectual curiosity and simple pleasures. What about you? Sarah asked as she wound pasta around her fork. Are you originally from Millbrook? Marcus nodded, which was technically true. Born and raised here, though I went away for college and lived in other places for a while before coming back. What brought you back? Luna asked. Most people who leave small towns don't return, unless there's a compelling reason. Another uncomfortably perceptive question. Marcus had returned to Millbrook specifically because he'd wanted to build his company somewhere with a strong sense of community, somewhere that valued substance over flash. But he could hardly explain that without revealing his true identity. Family, he said simply. My parents are getting older, and I wanted to be closer to them. Sarah's expression softened. That's wonderful. So many people get caught up in career advancement that they forget about the relationships that really matter. Marcus felt another pang of guilt. Here was this woman who had clearly organized her life around meaningful relationships and serving others, and he was lying to her about the most basic facts of his existence. What about your parents, Luna? He asked, trying to redirect attention away from his own fictional backstory. Do you have grandparents nearby? Luna and Sarah exchanged a look that spoke of shared loss. My parents died in a car accident when I was in college, Sarah said quietly. And Luna's father was an only child whose parents passed away before she was born. So it's mostly just us. Marcus felt his chest tighten again. I'm sorry. That must make things challenging sometimes. We've learned to create our own family, Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze Luna's hand again. Luna's teachers, my colleagues. At the hospital, our neighbors. Community doesn't have to be defined by blood relationships. Luna nodded seriously. Maimon always says that family is about choosing to show up for each other consistently, not about sharing DNA. The simple wisdom of that statement hit Marcus harder than he expected. When was the last time he'd chosen to show up consistently for anyone other than his shareholders? His relationships had become transactions, his personal life a series of obligations to be managed efficiently. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," he said. As they finished their meal, Marcus found himself reluctant for the evening to end. Despite the stress of maintaining his cover story, he was enjoying himself more than he had in months. Sarah's quiet warmth and Luna's brilliant curiosity had created a pocket of authenticity that made his usual world of corporate maneuvering feel hollow by comparison. "Would you like to get dessert?" he asked, hoping to extend their time together. Luna perked up. "They have excellent tiramisu here. Though I should warn you that I'll probably want to discuss the science behind Savoiardi absorption rates if I order it." Sarah laughed. She's not kidding. Luna can turn any dessert into a chemistry lesson. "I'd be fascinated to hear it," Marcus said, and realized he meant it. As Luna launched into an explanation of how Ladyfinger cookies achieved optimal coffee absorption without becoming structurally compromised, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversations he usually had over business dinners. Stock prices, market projections, competitive analyses. Important topics, certainly, but when was the last time he'd talked with someone who was excited about knowledge for its own? "Saki, you're very patient," Sarah observed quietly while Luna was distracted by the arrival of their dessert. "Most people get overwhelmed when she starts explaining things in detail." "She's remarkable," Marcus said honestly. "You've done an incredible job raising her." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "I can't take credit for her intelligence. That's just who she is. I just try to give her opportunities to explore her interests, and remember that she's still a child who needs stability and affection." Marcus watched Luna carefully dissecting her tiramisu to demonstrate the layer's structural integrity, her face bright with enthusiasm. "How do you balance encouraging her gifts with making sure she has a normal childhood?" "I'm not sure there's such a thing as normal," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But I try to make sure she has time for both intellectual pursuits and silly kid things. We have movie nights, we go hiking. She's learning to play piano even though she approaches it more like music theory homework than most kids would." "Does she have friends her own age?" Sarah's expression grew slightly wistful. "That's challenging. She's intellectually beyond most kids her age, but emotionally she's still 12. The homeschool community here is wonderful, but there aren't many children who share her level of academic intensity." Marcus felt a surge of protectiveness toward this brilliant, slightly lonely child. "Is that part of why she's applying to MIT? To find intellectual peers?" "Partly, but also because she's genuinely ready for that level of academic challenge. I've consulted with educational psychologists, and they all agree that holding her back would be more harmful than letting her advance." Luna looked up from her dessert analysis. "Are you talking about my social development challenges?" Sarah and Marcus both looked startled. "We weren't meaning to exclude you from the conversation, honey." Luna waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine. I know it's unusual for someone my age to be more comfortable discussing economic theory than boy bands, but I'd rather be authentically myself than pretend to be interested in things that bore me just to fit in." Marcus felt a stab of recognition. How many years had he spent pretending to be interested in things that bored him, networking events and charity galas where the conversation never went deeper than weather and stock prices? "That takes courage," he said to Luna. "Being authentically yourself when it makes you different from everyone else." Luna studied him with that penetrating gaze again. "It does, but the alternative is exhausting. Pretending to be someone you're not requires constantly monitoring yourself to make sure you don't slip up and reveal who you really are." Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. Was this child somehow seeing through his entire charade? "That sounds like it would be very stressful." "Incredibly stressful," Luna agreed. "Plus, it's ultimately self-defeating. If people only like the version of yourself that you're pretending to be, then they don't actually like you at all." They like a performance. Sarah was looking at her daughter with obvious pride. When did you become so wise about human psychology? I read a lot, Luna said simply. And I pay attention to how people behave. Most adults seem to spend enormous amounts of energy trying to manage how others perceive them, instead of just being genuinely themselves. Marcus felt as if this 12-year-old had just delivered a surgical strike to the heart of his entire approach to relationships. How much energy had he spent over the years crafting his public image, managing perceptions, being the version of himself that he thought others wanted to see? What about you? Luna asked, turning to Marcus with that direct gaze. Do you find it difficult to be authentic in your work? Graphic design seems like it would require balancing your own creative vision with what clients want. Marcus swallowed hard. It can be challenging, he said carefully. Sometimes there's tension between what you know would be most effective and what the client thinks they want. How do you handle that? Luna pressed. Marcus thought about the countless meetings where he'd had to convince board members or investors to support long-term, sustainable practices over short-term profit maximization. I try to find ways to educate them about why a different approach might serve their interests better. But sometimes you have to compromise. That must be frustrating when you know you're right but can't convince people to listen. Marcus nearly laughed at the understatement. It can be. Luna nodded thoughtfully. I imagine it's especially difficult when the stakes are high. Like, if you're working on something that could have significant positive impact, but people are too focused on immediate results to see the bigger picture. Once again, this child had articulated something Marcus struggled with daily. His board was constantly pressuring him to focus on quarterly earnings rather than the kind of long-term environmental impact that had driven him to start the company in the first place. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly what it's like. Sarah was watching this exchange with growing curiosity. You two seem to have a lot in common when it comes to thinking about work and purpose. Marcus felt panic flutter in his chest. Was his cover story beginning to unravel? I suppose anyone who cares about their work faces similar challenges. But Luna was still studying him with that unsettling intensity. It's interesting that you're so passionate about sustainable technology. For someone whose primary expertise is supposed to be graphic design. The observation hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel sweat forming under his borrowed clothes, and his mind raced to find a plausible explanation. I've always been interested in environmental issues, he said, hoping his voice sounded more casual than he felt. When you're designing for companies, you end up learning about their industries. Luna tilted her head slightly. But your knowledge seems quite specialized. When you talked about atmospheric processing technology earlier, you demonstrated understanding of technical implementation details that would be unusual for someone whose primary background is visual communications. Sarah looked between them with growing confusion. Luna, what are you getting at? Marcus felt his carefully constructed evening beginning to collapse around him. This remarkable child had somehow seen through his deception, and he had no idea how to respond without either lying more elaborately or revealing the truth. I'm just curious, Luna said, her tone remaining innocent even as her eyes suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. It's rare to meet someone outside of technical fields who understands the nuances of sustainable building integration at that level of detail. Marcus stared at this 12-year-old who had just cornered him more effectively than any investigative journalist ever had. How was he supposed to explain his way out of this without either continuing to lie to these genuinely wonderful people or admitting that he'd been deceiving them from the moment they'd met? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of Marcus's growing realization that his evening of pretending to be someone he wasn't had just been expertly dismantled by the most intellectually formidable 12-year-old he'd ever encountered. And despite the panic coursing through his veins, Marcus found himself thinking that Luna's ability to see through pretense and demand Authenticity might be exactly what he'd been missing in his life for years. The silence that followed Luna's observation stretched like a taut wire across the small cafe table. Marcus felt his pulse hammering against his collar, the borrowed baseball cap suddenly feeling like a neon sign advertising his deception. Around them, the gentle hum of evening conversations and clinking silverware continued, oblivious to the moment of truth unfolding in their corner booth. Sarah's hazel eyes moved between her daughter and Marcus, confusion etching deeper lines around her eyes. "Luna, sweetheart, I think you might be reading too much into things. People can be interested in subjects outside their professional expertise." But Luna's gaze remained fixed on Marcus, with the unwavering focus of a scientist observing a fascinating specimen. "Of course they can, Maman, but there's a difference between casual interest and the kind of detailed technical knowledge that comes from direct professional involvement." Marcus cleared his throat, his mind scrambling for a plausible explanation that wouldn't require him to weave an even more elaborate web of lies. "I've worked on several projects for companies in the sustainable technology sector. You pick up technical details when you're trying to create effective visual communications." Luna nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "That makes sense. Though it's interesting that your understanding seems particularly aligned with Chen Technologies' specific approach rather than the broader industry trends." The observation hit like a precise surgical strike. Marcus realized that in his enthusiasm for discussing his actual work, he'd revealed knowledge that was far too specific, too insider-focused for someone who was supposedly learning about the industry secondhand. "I've followed their work closely," he said carefully. "They're doing innovative things that have implications beyond just their immediate market." "They certainly are," Luna agreed. "Did you know that Marcus Chen, the CEO, actually started as a graphic designer? He studied visual communications at Stanford before getting into technology entrepreneurship." Marcus felt the color drain from his face. The biographical detail was accurate, but it was also information that wasn't widely publicized. Most business profiles focused on his technical achievements and business acumen, not his artistic background. "I didn't know that," Sarah said, glancing at Marcus with renewed interest. "That's quite a career transition." Luna's eyes sparkled with the excitement of someone who discovered an interesting connection. "It's fascinating, isn't it? How someone can start in one field and end up transforming a completely different industry. I wonder if his background in visual design influences how he approaches technological innovation." Marcus found himself caught between the desire to flee and an unexpected urge to engage authentically with Luna's insight. The truth was that his design background did influence his approach to technology development. He thought about user experience, about the visual and emotional impact of innovation, about creating solutions that were not just functional, but beautiful. "Design thinking can be valuable in any field," he managed. "The process of understanding user needs, iterating based on feedback, creating solutions that are both functional and elegant. Those principles apply whether you're creating a logo or developing new technology." Luna leaned forward, her intellectual curiosity fully engaged. "Exactly, which is why I find Chen Technologies' products so compelling. They don't just solve technical problems. They do it in ways that feel intuitive and visually harmonious. Their building integration systems actually enhance architectural aesthetics instead of compromising them." Sarah was watching this exchange with growing fascination. "You two could probably discuss this all evening. Luna, I think you've found someone who actually enjoys your technical deep dives." Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest despite his anxiety about maintaining his cover. When was the last time someone had engaged with his ideas with such genuine enthusiasm? His board meetings were filled with people who understood the financial implications of his innovations but rarely grasped the underlying vision. Here was A 12-year-old who not only understood what he was trying to achieve, but could articulate why it mattered. "What draws you to sustainable technology specifically?" he asked Luna, genuinely curious about her perspective. Luna's expression grew more serious, taking on the gravity of someone far beyond her years. "Because I think we're living through one of the most critical periods in human history. The decisions we make about energy, about urban development, about how we interact with our environment over the next decade will determine what kind of world exists for my generation and beyond." She paused, looking out the cafe window at the rain-soaked streets of Millbrook. "I know I'm just 12, and adults probably think I'm being overly dramatic. But when I look at climate data, when I read about species extinction rates and ocean acidification and atmospheric carbon levels, I don't see abstract problems. I see urgent challenges that require immediate, innovative solutions." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended the deception currently complicating his evening. "You're not being overly dramatic. Those are real challenges that require exactly the kind of systemic thinking you're describing." "But here's what frustrates me," Luna continued, her voice gaining intensity. "Most of the adults making decisions about these issues approach them as if they're theoretical future problems instead of current emergencies. They talk about sustainability as if it's a nice-to-have feature rather than an existential necessity." Sarah reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand gently. "Honey, remember that most people are doing their best with the information and resources they have." Luna's expression softened slightly. "I know, Mama. I don't mean to sound angry at people. I just get impatient sometimes with how slowly things change, especially when the science is so clear about what needs to happen." Marcus found himself leaning forward, drawn into the conversation despite the risk it posed to his cover story. "What do you think it would take to accelerate that change?" Luna's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone who'd given the question considerable thought. "Leadership from people who have the resources and influence to implement solutions at scale. Companies like Chen Technologies that are willing to prioritize long-term environmental impact over short-term profit maximization." She paused, studying Marcus's face with that penetrating gaze again, but also education and engagement at every level. "People need to understand that environmental sustainability isn't just about polar bears and rainforests. It's about creating economic systems that can sustain human civilization over the long term." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable child who understood the interconnectedness of environmental and economic sustainability better than most business leaders he knew. That's a sophisticated way to think about it. Most people see environmental protection and economic growth as competing priorities because they're thinking too short-term, Luna said with the confidence of someone who'd analyzed the issue thoroughly. "Sustainable practices require initial investment, but they generate long-term value that far exceeds the upfront costs. Solar installations, energy-efficient building systems, waste reduction technologies, they all save money over time while reducing environmental impact." Sarah was watching her daughter with obvious pride mixed with slight concern. Luna sometimes forgets that not everyone shares her passion for systems thinking and long-term planning. "It's not that I expect everyone to think like me," Luna clarified. "I just wish more people in positions of influence would consider the broader implications of their decisions. Like Marcus Chen, he could probably make more money in the short term by focusing on conventional technology development. But he's chosen to invest in solutions that will matter 50 years from now." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. This child understood his motivations better than his own board members, better than the business journalists who analyzed his company's performance, better than most of the people in his professional life. "You really admire him," Marcus observed, his voice slightly hoarse. Luna nodded enthusiastically. "I think he's one of the most important business leaders of our generation. Not because he's made a lot of money, though I'm sure he has, but because he's using his influence to address problems that really matter. The irony of the situation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was someone who admired the real version of himself, while he sat across from her, pretending to be someone else entirely. The weight of his deception felt suddenly unbearable. Sarah was studying Marcus with growing curiosity. "You seem very moved by Luna's perspective. Do you think about your own work in similar terms?" Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't deepen his deception while still honoring the genuine emotion Luna's insights had stirred in him. "I think anyone who cares about their work hopes it will have positive impact beyond just personal success." "But that's exactly what I mean," Luna said, her excitement building again. "Most people talk about wanting to make a difference, but they don't structure their entire approach around that goal." Marcus Chen didn't just decide to make his company more environmentally friendly. He built environmental sustainability into the fundamental architecture of his business model. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be extensively bookmarked research. Look at their corporate governance structure. They've legally committed to considering environmental impact in all major business decisions. They publish detailed sustainability reports that go far beyond regulatory requirements. They've invested in research partnerships with universities that focus on long-term environmental solutions rather than immediate commercial applications. Marcus watched in amazement as Luna displayed a more thorough understanding of his company's structure and philosophy than some of his own employees possessed. "You've really studied them extensively." "Of course," Luna said, as if intensive research into corporate governance structures was a normal hobby for 12-year-olds. "If you want to understand how to create meaningful change at scale, you study the organizations that are actually doing it successfully." Sarah was shaking her head in affectionate exasperation. "Sometimes I think Luna knows more about business strategy than most MBA graduates." "Business strategy is just applied systems thinking," Luna said matter-of-factly. "You identify desired outcomes, analyze the factors that influence those outcomes, and design processes that reliably generate the results you want." Marcus stared at this remarkable child who had just summarized decades of business education in a single sentence. "That's a very clear way to think about it. It's also why I find most business leaders frustrating," Luna continued. "They say they want sustainable growth and positive social impact, but their actual decision-making processes prioritize metrics that work against those goals." The observation cut close to the bone. Marcus thought about his own recent board meetings, the pressure to show quarterly growth that sometimes conflicted with his long-term sustainability investments. "What kind of metrics do you think they should prioritize instead?" he asked. Luna's expression grew thoughtful. "Well, that depends on what they're actually trying to achieve. If the goal is genuine sustainability, then you need metrics that measure long-term value creation rather than just short-term profit extraction." She began ticking off points on her fingers with the precision of someone who'd given the topic considerable thought. Environmental impact assessments that consider full life cycle costs. Employee satisfaction and retention rates that reflect genuine workplace culture rather than just compensation levels. Innovation metrics that measure breakthrough potential rather than just incremental improvements. Marcus felt a familiar frustration as Luna articulated exactly the kind of measurement framework he'd been trying to implement at Chen Technologies. His board tolerated his sustainability initiatives because the company was profitable, but they didn't share his vision of using business success as a platform for environmental leadership. Those sound like metrics that would require significant cultural change within most organizations, he observed. "Exactly," Luna agreed. "Which is why leadership matters so much. It takes someone with genuine commitment to long-term thinking to implement systems that prioritize sustainable value creation over immediate financial returns." Sarah was looking between them with an expression that suggested she was beginning to sense undercurrents she didn't fully understand. You two seem to have very aligned perspectives on business and sustainability. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck again. Luna's insights are very compelling. It's refreshing to meet someone who thinks so systematically about these issues. But Luna was studying him with that penetrating gaze again, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she was beginning to piece together information that didn't quite fit his cover story. "It's interesting," she said slowly, "that someone with your depth of understanding about sustainable business practices is working as a freelance graphic designer in a small town." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah looked at Marcus with renewed curiosity, and he realized that Luna's observation had highlighted an inconsistency he hadn't adequately addressed. "I've been thinking about transitioning into more strategic consulting work," he said carefully, "using design thinking to help companies develop more sustainable approaches to their business challenges." It wasn't entirely a lie. Marcus had been considering ways to use his platform to influence other business leaders toward more sustainable practices. But the explanation felt inadequate even as he offered it. Luna nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Design thinking methodology could definitely be valuable for companies trying to reimagine their approaches to sustainability challenges." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Have you considered reaching out to Chen Technologies? They seem like exactly the kind of company that would value innovative approaches to sustainable business development." Marcus felt his pulse spike. "I'm not sure I'd be qualified for that level of strategic work." "Why not?" Luna asked with the directness that only children seemed capable of. "You clearly understand their business model and philosophy. You think systematically about sustainability challenges. You have a background in design thinking that could bring fresh perspectives to their innovation processes." Sarah was watching this exchange with growing interest. Luna might be onto something. "You do seem unusually knowledgeable about their work." Marcus felt trapped between his desire to maintain his cover story and his growing admiration for Luna's insights. The truth was that Chen Technologies could absolutely benefit from the kind of design thinking approach Luna was describing. He'd been trying to implement exactly those principles within his own organization. "Maybe I'll look into it," he said weakly. But Luna's expression had shifted into something more analytical. "Actually, it's curious that you're not already working at that level, given your apparent expertise. Most people with your depth of understanding about sustainable business strategy would be consulting for major corporations or working directly within innovative companies." The observation was delivered with Luna's characteristic directness, but Marcus detected something more pointed in her tone. She was no longer just making conversation. She was actively investigating the inconsistencies in his story. Sarah seemed to sense the shift in dynamics as well. "Luna, maybe Marcus has personal reasons for preferring smaller-scale work. Not everyone wants to deal with corporate bureaucracy." "Of course," Luna said quickly. "I didn't mean to sound like I was questioning your choices. I'm just curious about how someone develops such specialized knowledge without being directly involved in the industry." Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue trying to deflect Luna's increasingly pointed questions, but her analytical mind was clearly not going to be satisfied with vague explanations. Or he could find a way to be more honest without completely revealing his identity. "You're very perceptive," he said finally. "The truth is, I have been more involved in the technology sector than I initially indicated. I've done consulting work for several companies, including some in sustainable technology." It was a carefully crafted partial truth that he hoped would satisfy Luna's curiosity without opening up new lines of questioning that would be harder to navigate. Luna's eyes brightened with interest. "What kind of consulting work? Strategic planning or more focused on specific technical challenges?" Marcus felt sweat forming under his borrowed clothes again. "A bit of both." helping companies think through how to communicate their sustainability initiatives effectively, how to align their visual branding with their environmental commitments. That's fascinating, Luna said. So you work with companies like Chen, technologies to help them translate their technical innovations into messages that resonate with broader audiences? The question was innocent enough, but Marcus detected a note of continued skepticism in Luna's voice. She was still probing, still trying to understand why his knowledge seemed so much more extensive than his stated background would suggest. Similar companies, he said carefully, though I can't discuss specific clients due to confidentiality agreements. It was a reasonable explanation that he hoped would deflect further questioning, but Luna's expression suggested she found the response interesting rather than satisfying. Of course, she said. Client confidentiality is important in consulting work. She paused, studying his face with that unnerving intensity again. Though it must be challenging to do effective branding and communication work for technology companies without having direct access to their internal development processes. Marcus felt his carefully constructed explanation beginning to unravel again. Luna's question highlighted another inconsistency. How could he have such detailed, technical knowledge if he was working as an external consultant rather than someone with inside access to company operations? You develop relationships with technical teams over time, he said, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. When companies trust your work, they share more detailed information about their innovations. Luna nodded slowly, but her expression remained analytical. That makes sense. Though your understanding of Chen Technology's specific technical approaches seems quite detailed for someone working from external information. Sarah was beginning to look concerned about the direction of the conversation. Luna, sweetheart, I think you might be making Marcus uncomfortable with all these questions about his work. But Marcus found himself caught between discomfort at Luna's probing and genuine respect for her analytical abilities. This child was conducting a more thorough investigation into his background than most business journalists managed. It's fine, he said to Sarah, then looked directly at Luna. You have excellent analytical instincts. Have you considered a career in investigative journalism? Luna smiled, but the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. I prefer scientific research to journalism. Scientists get to discover new truths rather than just uncovering hidden ones. The distinction was subtle but pointed, and Marcus realized that Luna was essentially telling him she knew he was hiding something while giving him an opportunity to come clean voluntarily. The weight of his deception felt suddenly overwhelming. Here were two genuinely wonderful people who had welcomed him into their evening with warmth and openness, and he was repaying their kindness with an elaborate lie about his most basic identity. Luna, he said quietly, what would you do if you discovered that someone you just met wasn't being entirely honest about who they were? Luna's expression grew thoughtful. That would depend on why they felt the need to be dishonest. Were they trying to harm someone, or were they protecting themselves from something? The question cut directly to the heart of Marcus's motivations. What if they were protecting themselves from being judged based on preconceptions rather than who they actually are? Then I'd probably wonder why they didn't trust me enough to let me make that judgment for myself, Luna said with characteristic directness. Sarah was looking increasingly confused by this exchange. Are we still talking hypothetically? Marcus met Luna's gaze and saw understanding there, along with something that might have been disappointment. This remarkable child had figured out that he was deceiving them, and she was giving him a chance to choose honesty over continued deception. Not entirely, he said quietly. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with implications that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to face. But looking at Luna's intelligent, honest face, and at Sarah's open, trusting expression, he realized that continuing to lie felt worse than whatever consequences the truth might bring. I haven't been completely honest with you tonight, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. About who I am. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to concern. What do you mean? Marcus took a deep breath, feeling as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff. My name is Marcus Chen, but I'm not a freelance graphic designer. Luna's eyes widened slightly, but her expression remained more curious than shocked. Sarah looked between them, clearly trying to process this revelation. Then what do you do? Sarah asked quietly. Marcus met her gaze, seeing his reflection in her hazel eyes and realizing that whatever happened next, he couldn't continue building a relationship on a foundation of lies. I'm the CEO of Chen Technologies. The words hung in the air like a confession at an altar, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. Marcus watched as comprehension dawned across Sarah's face, her hazel eyes widening as the implications of his revelation settled into her consciousness. Luna, meanwhile, sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable in the way that only exceptionally intelligent children could manage when processing complex information. The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the soft clinking of coffee cups from other tables and the distant sound of rain against the cafe windows. Marcus felt exposed in a way he hadn't experienced since childhood, when his mother would catch him in some small deception and wait with infinite patience for him to explain himself. Chen Technologies, Sarah repeated slowly, as if testing the words on her tongue. The Chen Technologies that Luna has been talking about all evening. Marcus nodded, unable to find his voice. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, more for something to do with his nervous energy than from any desire for caffeine. Luna leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I knew something didn't add up, she said quietly. Your knowledge was too specific, too detailed for someone working as an external consultant. And when you talked about atmospheric processing technology, you used the kind of technical language that comes from direct involvement in development processes. Sarah was shaking her head slowly, her expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and what might have been the beginning of anger. So everything you told us tonight was a lie? The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not everything, he said quickly. My background in graphic design is real. My interest in sustainability is genuine. My parents did emigrate from Taiwan, and I was born and raised in Millbrook. But you're not a struggling freelancer living in a studio apartment, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled in the way that suggested she was working hard to maintain her composure. No, Marcus admitted, I'm not. Luna was studying him with that penetrating analytical gaze again, but now there was something different in her expression. Where before there had been curiosity and intellectual engagement, now there was a wariness that made Marcus's chest ache. Why? Luna asked simply. Why pretend to be someone you're not? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, dislodging the baseball cap he'd forgotten he was wearing. Because I wanted to meet someone who would like me for who I am, not what I own, or what I could provide for them. Sarah's laugh was sharp and humorless. So you decided to lie about your fundamental identity instead. How exactly does that help you meet someone genuine? The question exposed the flawed logic that had seemed so reasonable when Emma had first suggested this charade. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck as he tried to articulate motivations that suddenly seemed absurd. My last relationship ended because my ex-wife fell in love with my lifestyle rather than me, he said quietly. I wanted to know if it was possible for someone to be interested in who I am as a person, separate from the financial security or social status that comes with my position. Luna tilted her head slightly. But how can someone get to know who you are as a person if you're actively deceiving them about basic facts of your existence? The 12-year-old had identified the central contradiction in his approach with surgical precision. Marcus felt his carefully constructed rationalization crumble under the weight of her logic. I suppose I thought I could reveal the truth gradually, once I was sure someone was interested in me rather than my wealth. When exactly were you planning to do that? Sarah asked, her voice growing sharper. After we'd been dating for months? After I'd introduced you to my friends and colleagues as a struggling graphic designer? After Luna had written her college application essays about meeting her hero without realizing she'd actually met him? Each question felt like another stone added to the weight of guilt settling in Marcus's stomach. He hadn't thought through the practical implications of his deception, the ways it would complicate any relationship that developed from this false foundation. I hadn't thought that far ahead, he admitted. Clearly, Sarah said dryly. Luna was still studying him with that analytical intensity, but her expression had shifted again. Can I ask you something? Marcus nodded, bracing himself for another uncomfortable insight. When you were talking about your work earlier, about the importance of aligning visual design with authentic values, you seemed genuinely passionate about integrity in communication. How do you reconcile that professional philosophy with choosing to build a personal relationship on deception? The question hit harder than any accusation or expression of anger could have. Luna had identified the fundamental hypocrisy in his behavior with the kind of clarity that made his throat tighten with shame. I can't, he said quietly. I can't reconcile it. You're absolutely right that I was being hypocritical. Sarah was watching this exchange with an expression that suggested she was reevaluating everything about the evening. So what now? Do you have a whole team of people who help you maintain this false identity? Is this something you do regularly? No, Marcus said quickly. This was the first time I've ever done anything like this. My sister Emma convinced me to try online dating, and she thought it would be interesting to see if I could meet someone without the complications that come with my public profile. Your sister knew you were planning to lie to whoever you met? Marcus felt another wave of shame as he realized how his family's involvement made the deception seem even more calculated and deliberate. She created the dating profile without telling me all the details. I only discovered what she'd written when I was already committed to meeting you. Luna raised an eyebrow. So you could have corrected the misinformation at any point this evening, but you chose not to. Yes, Marcus said. I chose not to. The admission sat between them like an indictment. Marcus realized that blaming Emma for creating the initial deception only made his decision to perpetuate it seem more deliberate and selfish. Sarah was shaking her head again, her expression growing more distant. I don't understand how someone who claims to value authenticity and integrity could think it was acceptable to lie about their identity to someone they were hoping to build a relationship with. Because I've been hurt before, Marcus said, the words coming out more defensively than he'd intended. Because every relationship I've had since my company became successful has been complicated by people's assumptions about what my wealth means for them. Luna's expression softened slightly. I can understand why that would be difficult and why you might want to avoid that dynamic. But deceiving people isn't a solution to being deceived by others. The simple wisdom of her observation made Marcus feel even smaller. This 12-year-old understood relationship dynamics better than he did. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't undo the deception, but I am genuinely sorry for lying to both of you. Sarah was studying his face as if trying to determine whether his apology was genuine or simply another manipulation. What exactly are you sorry for? Being caught or choosing to deceive us in the first place? The distinction was important, and Marcus took a moment to consider his answer carefully. I'm sorry for choosing to deceive you. I'm sorry for deciding that my fear of being judged was more important than your right to make informed decisions about who you wanted to spend time with. Luna nodded approvingly. That's a better apology. It acknowledges that the problem was your choice, not our discovery of your deception. Marcus found himself grateful for Luna's analytical approach to the situation, even as it continued to expose the flaws in his thinking. Her ability to separate emotional reactions from logical evaluation was helping him understand the ethical dimensions of what he'd done. "Can I ask you something else?" Luna said, "Of course. When you were talking about Chen Technologies earlier, when I was sharing my admiration for the company's work, how did that feel? Knowing that I was praising you while you were pretending to be someone else?" Marcus felt his chest tighten as he remembered Luna's enthusiastic discussion of his company's environmental initiatives, her detailed analysis of his business philosophy, her articulation of why his approach to sustainability mattered for future generations. "It felt incredible," he said honestly, "and terrible. Incredible because you understood what I was trying to achieve better than most people in my professional life. Terrible because I knew I was experiencing that connection under false pretenses." Luna nodded thoughtfully. "So you were getting the authentic engagement you claimed to want, but it was built on deception. That must have been confusing." "It was," Marcus agreed. "I kept wanting to tell you the truth, especially when you were talking about the company's mission and values. But I was also terrified that if you knew who I really was, you'd stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as a symbol or an opportunity." Sarah's expression had shifted from anger toward something more complex. "So you were protecting yourself from a judgment that we hadn't actually made?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I was projecting my past experiences onto you without giving you the chance to respond authentically to who I actually am." Luna was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's surface as she processed the conversation. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful rather than accusatory. "I think I understand why you made the choices you did, even though I disagree with them. Fear of vulnerability can make people do things that work against their own values." Marcus felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. This remarkable child was offering him more understanding than he deserved, more grace than he'd shown himself in making the decision to deceive them. "Thank you for saying that," he said quietly. "Though I'm not sure I deserve your understanding." "Understanding doesn't require deserving," Luna said with the kind of wisdom that seemed impossible from someone her age. "It just requires recognizing that people are complex and sometimes make choices that contradict their better judgment." Sarah was watching her daughter with obvious pride mixed with concern. "Luna, sweetheart, you don't have to take care of everyone's emotional needs. It's okay to be upset when someone lies to you." Luna looked at her mother with a small smile. "I am upset, but I'm also trying to understand why it happened so I can decide how I want to respond." She turned back to Marcus, her expression becoming more serious. "The thing is, now I don't know which parts of our conversation tonight were genuine and which parts were performance. When you were asking questions about my interests, were you actually curious about my answers, or were you just trying to maintain your cover story?" The question hit Marcus like a gut punch. He realized that his deception had poisoned not just his own authenticity, but had cast doubt on every moment of connection they'd shared. "My curiosity was completely genuine," he said urgently. "Everything I said about finding your perspectives remarkable and insightful was true. The questions I asked came from real interest in who you are as a person." Luna studied his face for a long moment. "How can I tell the difference between the parts of you that were real tonight and the parts that were fabricated?" Marcus felt the full weight of what his deception had cost. It wasn't just about the lies he'd told. It was about the trust he'd destroyed and the doubt he'd introduced into every genuine moment they'd shared. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't know how to prove to you that my interest in your work, my admiration for your intelligence, my enjoyment of our conversation, was all completely real." Sarah was shaking her head slowly. "This is exactly why honesty matters from the beginning. Once trust is broken, everything becomes questionable." Marcus knew she was right, but the knowledge felt like salt in an open wound. "Is there any way to rebuild that trust?" Luna and Sarah exchanged a look that spoke of their close relationship and shared decision-making process. Marcus realized that whatever happened next would be their choice together, and he had no right to influence that decision. I need to think about it, Sarah said finally. This evening has been a lot to process. Luna nodded in agreement. I need time to sort through what parts of tonight were authentic and what parts were influenced by your deception. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. Can I see you again? Both of you? I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'd like the opportunity to show you who I really am. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral. I don't know, Marcus. How do I know that the person you show me next time will be any more real than the person you showed me tonight? The question exposed another layer of the problem his deception had created. Even if he were completely honest going forward, Sarah had no reason to trust that honesty after he'd proven himself capable of such elaborate deception. Because I've learned something tonight, Marcus said, knowing how inadequate the words sounded even as he spoke them. I've learned that getting the connection I wanted through deception made it meaningless. I've learned that trying to protect myself from vulnerability only created more problems. Luna was studying him with that analytical gaze again. What specifically have you learned? Marcus took a deep breath, trying to articulate insights that were still forming in his mind. I've learned that authentic connection requires risk. That you can't build real relationships while protecting yourself from the possibility of being hurt. That my fear of being judged for my wealth was actually preventing me from finding out whether people could accept me as a whole person. He paused, looking directly at Luna. And I've learned that remarkable people like you deserve honesty from the beginning, not deception followed by apologies. Luna nodded slowly. Those are important insights. But understanding what you did wrong doesn't automatically qualify you for forgiveness or another chance. The 12-year-old's emotional intelligence continued to astound Marcus. She was absolutely right that recognizing mistakes didn't entitle him to absolution. I know, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness or demanding another chance. I'm just hoping that you'll consider giving me the opportunity to show you who I am when I'm not hiding behind false stories. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup as she stared out the window at the rain-soaked street. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. The hardest part for me is wondering what else you might be hiding. If you were willing to lie about your career and financial situation, how do I know you're being honest about being divorced, or about your family background, or about any of the other personal details you shared? Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized the full scope of damage his deception had caused. Sarah wasn't just questioning his false identity. She was questioning everything about him. Everything else I told you is true, he said desperately. My divorce from Clarissa, my relationship with my parents, my sister Emma, my background growing up in Millbrook. The only things I lied about were my current profession and living situation. Luna tilted her head slightly. But how can we verify that? How can we distinguish between the truths and the lies when you've already proven yourself capable of maintaining detailed deceptions? Marcus realized that he was facing the logical consequences of his choices. By lying about fundamental aspects of his identity, he'd created a situation where nothing he said could be taken at face value. I suppose I can't prove it to you, he said quietly. I can only tell you that everything else was true and hope that you'll give me the chance to demonstrate my honesty over time. Sarah was shaking her head. But that's exactly the problem. I can't build a relationship with someone when I have to constantly wonder whether they're being honest with me. That level of uncertainty would be exhausting and ultimately destructive. Marcus felt the weight of consequences settling around him like a physical presence. His attempt to protect himself from judgment had created a situation where trust was impossible. I understand, he said, even though understanding didn't make the reality any less painful. I understand why you can't trust me now. Luna was studying his face with that penetrating gaze again. Can I ask you something else? Marcus nodded, bracing himself for another uncomfortable insight. If the situation were reversed, if you discovered that someone you just met had been lying to you about their fundamental identity, would you be willing to give them another chance? The question forced Marcus to examine his own standards and reactions. He thought about how he'd felt when Clarissa's motivations for their relationship had become clear, how betrayed he'd been by what felt like fundamental dishonesty about her intentions. Probably not, he admitted. I'd probably feel too uncertain about what else they might be hiding to want to pursue a relationship. Luna nodded. So you understand why this situation is problematic from our perspective? I do, Marcus said. I do understand, and I don't blame you for not wanting to see me again. I'm just sorry that my fear and poor judgment have cost us the chance to build something genuine. Sarah was watching this exchange with an expression that suggested she was impressed by Luna's handling of the situation while still processing her own feelings about Marcus's deception. Luna makes a good point about reciprocal standards, she said finally. If I can't trust someone to be honest about basic facts, how can I trust them with more significant emotional vulnerabilities? Marcus felt tears threatening again as the full implications of his choices became clear. You can't, he said. I've made trust impossible, and I have no one to blame but myself. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with finality. Marcus realized that this might be the end of what had been the most meaningful conversation he'd had in years, a connection destroyed by his own fear and deception. Luna was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still tracing patterns on the table surface. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and thoughtful. I want to ask you one more question, but I need you to answer it completely honestly. Can you do that? Marcus nodded, feeling as if he were standing at the edge of another cliff. If we were to give you another chance, if we were to agree to see you again, with the understanding that you would be completely honest going forward, what would that look like? What would you want from us, and what would you be willing to offer? In return, the question surprised Marcus. He'd expected Luna to conclude their conversation with a final judgment, not to explore the possibility of moving forward. But her tone suggested that this was a serious inquiry rather than a theoretical exercise. I would want the chance to show you who I really am, Marcus said carefully. Not the carefully managed public version of myself that appears in business magazines, but the actual person behind the professional accomplishments. Someone who worries about whether his work actually matters, who struggles with loneliness despite being surrounded by people, who still feels like the uncertain kid who started a company in his garage sometimes. He paused, trying to find words for feelings he'd rarely articulated even to himself. I would want to learn about your lives, your interests, your hopes and concerns. I would want Luna to feel comfortable sharing her remarkable insights without having to wonder about my motivations for listening. I would want Sarah to know that my interest in her has nothing to do with what she could provide for me and everything to do with who she is as a person. Sarah was listening intently, her expression unreadable. And what would you be willing to offer in return? Marcus considered the question carefully, knowing that his answer needed to be both honest and realistic. Complete transparency about my life and circumstances. No more false identities or carefully managed presentations of myself. Patience with your need to verify my honesty and rebuild trust gradually. Respect for your right to set boundaries and move at whatever pace feels comfortable for both of you. He looked directly at Luna. And if you're serious about applying to MIT, I'd be honored to write you a recommendation letter. Not because I'm trying to buy your forgiveness, but because your insights and analytical abilities deserve recognition from people who can support your academic goals. Luna's eyes widened slightly. You would do that? I would do that whether we ever see each other again or not, Marcus said. Your intellectual gifts and passion for sustainable technology are exactly what programs like MIT are looking for. You deserve every opportunity to pursue your interests at the highest levels. Sarah was studying Marcus's face as if trying to determine whether his offer was genuine or manipulative. That's a generous offer, but it also feels like it could be an attempt to influence our decision about seeing you again. Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment as he realized how his offer might be perceived. You're right to be suspicious. I can't prove that my motivations are pure, and I understand if you'd prefer not to accept help from someone who's already deceived you. Luna was quiet for a long moment, her analytical mind clearly working through the complex dynamics of the situation. Can I have some time to think about this? Of course, Marcus said. Take as much time as you need. Sarah was gathering her purse and coat, signaling that their evening was coming to an end. I think we need to process everything that's happened tonight before making any decisions about moving forward. Marcus stood as they prepared to leave, feeling the weight of uncertainty about whether he would ever see them again. Can I ask how long you might need to think it over? Luna and Sarah exchanged another look before Sarah answered. Give us a week. We'll contact you if we decide we want to see you again. Marcus nodded, knowing that a week would feel like an eternity, but understanding that they needed space to evaluate the situation without pressure from him. Can I give you my real contact information? He asked. Not the fake details from the dating profile, but my actual phone number and email address? Sarah considered for a moment before nodding. Marcus wrote his information on a napkin, his hands trembling slightly as he realized this might be the last interaction he had with these remarkable people. Thank you for being honest with me about who you really are, Luna said as they prepared to leave. I know it wasn't easy to admit your deception, especially when you knew it might end our conversation. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for giving me the chance to tell the truth, even though I should have done it from the beginning. Sarah paused at the edge of the table. Marcus, can I ask you one final question? He nodded. Was any part of this evening what you were hoping for when you decided to try dating again? Marcus thought about Luna's brilliant insights, Sarah's warmth and intelligence, the feeling of being seen and understood that he'd experienced even in the midst of his deception. Yes, he said quietly. The connection I felt with both of you was everything I'd been hoping for and more, which makes it all the more tragic that I undermined it with dishonesty. Sarah nodded slowly. That's what I thought, which makes the situation even more complicated. As they walked toward the door, Luna turned back one more time. Marcus, yes? For what it's worth, I think the person you were tonight, underneath the deception, is someone worth knowing. I hope you'll remember that, regardless of what we decide. And then they were gone, leaving Marcus alone in the cafe with the weight of his choices and the uncertain hope that remarkable people sometimes offered second chances to those who had learned from their mistakes. The week that followed felt like the longest 7 days of Marcus's life. He found himself checking his phone obsessively, jumping at every notification with the desperate hope that Sarah or Luna had decided to contact him. His assistant, Patricia, commented more than once that he seemed distracted during board meetings, his usual sharp focus replaced by a restless energy that had him pacing his corner office overlooking downtown Millbrook. On Wednesday afternoon, he stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows watching the traffic flow along Main Street below, wondering if Sarah was at the hospital working her shift in pediatric oncology. The thought of her caring for children facing impossible challenges, while he wallowed in the consequences of his own poor choices, made him feel selfish and small. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did the date go? I haven't heard from you all week, which either means it was amazing or disastrous. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, disastrous. We'll call you tonight. But when evening came, he couldn't bring himself to dial Emma's number. How could he explain that he'd met the most remarkable woman and child he'd ever encountered, only to destroy any possibility of a relationship through his own deception? How could he articulate the shame of realizing that his attempts to protect himself had hurt two people who deserved nothing but honesty and respect? Instead, he found himself driving through the quiet streets of Millbrook at dusk, past the familiar landmarks of his childhood. The elementary school where he'd learned to read, the park where he'd played soccer on Saturday mornings, the ice cream shop where his parents had taken him to celebrate good report cards. Everything looked the same, but he felt fundamentally changed by the events of the previous week. Thursday brought a breakthrough in his company's latest sustainability project. The engineering team had successfully tested a new atmospheric processing system that could be integrated into existing urban infrastructure to improve air quality while generating renewable energy. It was exactly the kind of innovation that had driven him to start Chen Technologies, the kind of achievement that could have meaningful environmental impact at scale. Marcus stood in the research lab listening to his lead engineer explain the technical specifications, but instead of the usual satisfaction he felt when breakthrough innovations came to fruition, he found himself thinking about Luna. She would understand the implications of this technology immediately. She would ask insightful questions about scalability and implementation challenges. She would see beyond the technical achievement to the potential for systemic change. The realization that he might never have the chance to share his work's most meaningful developments with someone who truly understood their importance felt like a physical ache in his chest. Friday afternoon, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his assistant into his office and asked her to clear his schedule for the following Monday. "Everything?" Patricia asked, raising an eyebrow. "You have the quarterly board meeting scheduled for Monday morning." "Reschedule it," Marcus said. "There's something more important I need to do." Patricia stared at him with the expression of someone who'd worked for him for 5 years and had never heard him describe anything as more important than quarterly board meetings. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Marcus almost smiled at her concern. "I'm feeling like I need to make some changes in how I prioritize things." That evening, he drove to Chen Technologies' main research facility and spent hours walking through the labs and development spaces. The building was nearly empty at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. Just a few dedicated engineers working late on projects they were passionate about. Marcus found himself envying their clear sense of purpose, their ability to focus on meaningful work without the constant weight of strategic decisions and stakeholder management. In the Sustainable Architecture Lab, he paused in front of a prototype display that showed how their atmospheric processing technology could be integrated into residential and commercial buildings. The visual presentation was technically accurate but uninspiring, the kind of corporate communication that prioritized information delivery over emotional engagement. Marcus thought about Luna's observation that Chen Technologies' branding felt confident without being arrogant, innovative without being flashy. He wondered what she would think of this particular presentation, whether she would see it as effective communication or missed opportunity to inspire broader adoption of sustainable technology. The thought gave him an idea that felt both risky and necessary. Saturday morning, Marcus sat in his home office crafting an email that felt more important than any business communication he'd ever written. He wrote and deleted dozens of drafts, struggling to find words that would convey his intentions without seeming manipulative or self-serving. Finally, he settled on something simple and direct. "Dear Luna and Sarah, I know you asked for a week to consider whether you'd be willing to see me again, and I want to respect that timeline completely. I'm not writing to pressure you for a decision or to make additional arguments for why you should give me another chance. I'm writing because something happened at work this week that made me think of Luna's insights about sustainable technology, and I realized I wanted to share it with her regardless of whether we ever see each other again. My engineering team achieved a breakthrough in atmospheric processing technology that could be integrated into urban infrastructure to improve air quality while generating renewable energy. It's exactly the kind of systemic solution Luna was talking about when she discussed the intersection of environmental science and economic development. Luna, if you're interested in learning more about this development for your MET application or your research into sustainable technology, I would be honored to arrange a tour of our facilities and a meeting with our lead engineers. This offer stands whether or not you and your mother decide to see me again personally. Your passion for environmental solutions and your analytical brilliance deserve every opportunity to engage with cutting-edge research in the field. My personal mistakes shouldn't prevent you from accessing resources that could support your academic and career goals. Sarah, thank you for raising someone with such remarkable intelligence and integrity. Luna's ability to think systematically about complex challenges while maintaining genuine concern for human welfare is extraordinary. You should be incredibly proud of the person she's becoming. I hope you're both well. Marcus, he read the email a dozen times before finally pressing send, his heart racing as if he were taking a leap from a great height. Sunday passed in a haze of restless energy. Marcus tried to focus on a book about sustainable urban planning, but his mind kept wandering to Sarah and Luna. Were they discussing his email? Had they already decided they didn't want to see him again? Was Luna intrigued by the offer to tour the research facilities, or did she see it as another attempt at manipulation? Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Marcus's mood as he sat in his office, trying to focus on quarterly reports while checking his phone every few minutes. The rescheduled board meeting was set for Tuesday, which meant he had an unusual luxury of unstructured time that he found himself unable to utilize productively. At 10:30, his phone rang. Marcus glanced at the caller ID and felt his heart stop. Sarah Mitchell. He answered on the second ring, trying to keep his voice casual despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Hello? Hi, Marcus. It's Sarah. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Of course, Marcus said, closing his laptop and giving the call his complete attention. How are you? We're well, thank you. Luna and I spent the weekend discussing your email and the situation. In general, we'd like to see you again, but there are some conditions we need to discuss. Marcus felt a surge of hope so intense it made him dizzy. I'm willing to agree to any conditions you think are necessary. Sarah's voice remained carefully controlled. First, we want complete transparency about your life and circumstances. No more carefully managed presentations or strategic omissions. If we ask you a question, we need to know that you're giving us the full truth. Absolutely, Marcus said. Immediately, complete transparency. Second, we need to move slowly. Luna and I both felt a genuine connection with you last week, but rebuilding trust after deception takes time. We're not interested in rushing into anything. I understand completely. Whatever pace feels comfortable for both of you. Sarah paused for a moment before continuing. Third, Luna wants to take you up on your offer to tour the Chen Technologies facilities. But she wants to do it as herself, not as someone you're trying to impress or win over. She's genuinely interested in the research for its own sake. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. That would be perfect. Our lead engineer would be thrilled to show her the atmospheric processing lab. When would work for her schedule? Are you free this afternoon? Luna is homeschooled, so her schedule is flexible. Marcus thought about his cleared calendar, the quarterly reports waiting on his desk, the dozen meetings Patricia would need to reschedule to accommodate this request. This afternoon would be perfect. Good. We'll meet you at your offices at 2 o'clock. Luna has prepared a list of questions about the technology that she's hoping to discuss with your engineering team. Of course she had. Marcus felt that familiar mixture of admiration and slight intimidation that Luna's intellectual intensity inspired. I'll make sure our best people are available to answer her questions. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his office chair feeling lighter than he had since the previous Monday night. He wasn't naive enough to think that one facility tour would resolve the trust issues his deception had created. But it was a beginning. An opportunity to show Luna and Sarah who he really was when he wasn't hiding behind false identities. He called down to the research lab and spoke with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, his lead atmospheric engineer. "Jen, I need a favor. I'm bringing a very bright 12-year-old to tour the facility this afternoon, and she's going to ask questions that will probably challenge your assumptions about what children are capable of understanding." Dr. Walsh laughed. A 12-year-old who understands atmospheric processing technology. This should be interesting. Trust me, it will be. Her name is Luna Mitchell, and she's applying for early admission to MIT's environmental engineering program. She knows more about sustainable technology than most of my board members. I'll be ready for her. What time? Should I expect you? 2 o'clock. And Jen? Don't dumb anything down for her. She can handle the technical details. Marcus spent the rest of the morning preparing for Luna and Sarah's visit. He reviewed the latest developments in their atmospheric processing research, refreshed his memory on the technical specifications Luna would want to discuss, and tried to anticipate the kinds of questions her analytical mind would generate. But underneath his professional preparation, he felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with business presentations or board meetings. This wasn't about impressing potential investors or winning over stakeholders. This was about showing two people he genuinely cared about who he really was when he wasn't performing or managing perceptions. At 1:45, Marcus waited in the lobby of Chen Technologies headquarters, watching through the glass doors for Sarah's car. The building around him hummed with the energy of innovation and purpose. Engineers and researchers moving between labs and meeting rooms, with the focused intensity of people working on problems that mattered. He'd built this place to be more than just another corporate office building. The architecture incorporated sustainable design principles, with living walls that improved air quality, solar panels integrated seamlessly into the roof structure, and rainwater collection systems that irrigated the surrounding landscaping. Every detail reflected his commitment to environmental responsibility and his belief that businesses could be forces for positive change. But standing there waiting for Luna and Sarah, Marcus realized that all of his professional achievements felt incomplete without people who truly understood what he was trying to accomplish. He'd surrounded himself with talented engineers and dedicated employees, but he'd been missing the kind of intellectual partnership and emotional connection that made success meaningful. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah's car pulled into the visitor parking area. Marcus watched through the glass as Luna emerged from the passenger seat, carrying a small notebook and wearing an expression of focused excitement. She looked around at the building with obvious interest, taking in the architectural details and sustainable design elements with the attention of someone who appreciated both form and function. Sarah approached the doors with a more cautious expression, clearly still processing the reality of her daughter's intellectual gifts being recognized by someone of Marcus's professional stature. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes, and Marcus felt that familiar flutter of attraction mixed with genuine respect for her strength and independence. "Welcome to Chen Technologies," Marcus said as they entered the lobby. "Luna, are you ready to see where we develop the atmospheric processing systems you've been researching?" Luna's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone about to explore her favorite subject. "I've been looking forward to this all week. I have questions about the catalyst efficiency ratings and the scalability challenges for urban implementation." Marcus grinned. "Dr. Walsh is going to love you." As they rode the elevator to the research floors, Marcus found himself seeing his workplace through Luna's eyes. The walls displayed information about current projects and environmental impact metrics, but also featured artwork created by local students exploring themes of sustainability and innovation. The conference rooms were named after pioneering environmental scientists rather than corporate executives, and the common areas included living plants and natural light whenever possible. "This doesn't look like the corporate offices I've seen in movies," Luna observed. "That was intentional," Marcus said. "I wanted to create a workspace that reflected our values and supported creativity rather than hierarchy." Sarah was taking in the details as well, her expression suggesting she was beginning to understand something about Marcus's character through the environment he'd created. "It feels more like a university research facility than a traditional business." "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Marcus said. "The best innovations happen when brilliant people feel supported to explore ideas without worrying about corporate politics or rigid structures." They arrived at the atmospheric processing lab, where Dr. Walsh was waiting with several of her team members. Marcus made introductions, watching with amusement as the engineer's expressions shifted from polite interest to genuine excitement when Luna began asking technical questions that demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of their work. "You mentioned catalyst efficiency in the elevator," Dr. Walsh said, leading them to a prototype display. "What specifically were you wondering about?" Luna consulted her notebook before responding. "I was curious about whether you'd experimented with bio-inspired catalyst designs that could improve efficiency while reducing manufacturing costs and environmental impact." Dr. Walsh's eyebrows shot up. "That's exactly what we're working on in our next phase of development." "How did you know to ask about bio-inspired approaches?" "I've been studying biomimetic engineering applications in sustainable technology," Luna said matter-of-factly. "Nature has already solved most of the efficiency problems we're trying to address. It seemed logical that atmospheric processing systems could benefit from similar approaches." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. Luna wasn't just asking intelligent questions. She was identifying research directions that his team was actively pursuing. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple fields and identify innovative solutions was genuinely remarkable. Sarah stood beside him, watching her daughter engage with the engineers with obvious pride mixed with the slight bewilderment of a parent, realizing their child's gifts extended far beyond what she'd previously understood. "Has she always been like this?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah smiled. "Ever since she could talk, she's been asking questions that made me realize how little I actually knew about the world. But this level of technical sophistication is new. I think having access to university-level coursework has allowed her to explore subjects that match her intellectual capacity." For the next hour, Luna toured the lab with the intensity of a graduate student, asking detailed questions about technical specifications, manufacturing processes, and implementation challenges. She examined prototype equipment with careful attention, took notes on efficiency metrics, and engaged the engineers in discussions that pushed them to articulate their work in new ways. Marcus found himself stepping back and simply observing, struck by how naturally Luna fit into this environment of innovation and discovery. This was where she belonged, surrounded by people who shared her passion for solving complex problems and creating solutions that could benefit humanity at scale. "Mr. Chen," Luna said, approaching him with a thoughtful expression, "could I ask you something about the business side of this technology?" "Of course." The atmospheric processing systems could generate significant revenue while providing environmental benefits. How do you balance profit considerations with the goal of making the technology accessible to communities that need it most but have limited financial resources? The question went straight to the heart of one of Marcus's most challenging strategic decisions. How do you scale sustainable technology in ways that prioritize environmental impact over pure profit maximization? "That's one of the most important questions we face," Marcus said. "We've structured our business model to use revenue from premium installations in wealthy markets to subsidize implementation in underserved communities." Luna nodded approvingly, like a cross-subsidy approach that makes social impact financially sustainable. "Exactly. We also partner with universities and nonprofit organizations to develop implementation strategies that prioritize environmental justice alongside technical efficiency. Sarah was listening to this conversation with growing understanding of what Marcus's work actually entailed. This wasn't just about building a successful technology company. It was about using business success as a platform for addressing systemic environmental challenges. Could you show us some examples of how this works in practice? Luna asked. Marcus led them to a conference room where he pulled up presentation materials showing Chen Technologies' community partnership programs. Maps displayed implementation. Sites around the country, with detailed information about environmental impact metrics and community benefits. This installation in Newark provides clean air processing for 3 elementary schools, while generating enough renewable energy to power the district's computer labs. Marcus explained, pointing to one project. The technology was installed at no cost to the school district, funded through revenue from premium installations in Manhattan commercial buildings. Luna studied the data with obvious fascination. So the same technology serves both affluent and underserved communities, but the funding structure ensures that environmental benefits aren't limited by economic inequality. That's the goal, Marcus said. Though we're still learning how to optimize the model for maximum impact. Sarah was watching this exchange with an expression that suggested she was beginning to understand something important about Marcus's character and motivations. This wasn't the behavior of someone primarily motivated by wealth accumulation. This was the work of someone genuinely committed to using business success for social good. Marcus, she said quietly, this is remarkable work. I had no idea that Chen Technologies was structured to prioritize community impact alongside profitability. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. It's important to me that the company's success translates into meaningful environmental progress. Profit without purpose feels hollow. Luna was still studying the project data, her analytical mind clearly processing implications beyond the technical specifications. Have you considered expanding this approach internationally? Many developing countries face severe air quality challenges, but lack resources for advanced environmental technology. We're beginning to explore international partnerships, Marcus said, though the regulatory and implementation challenges are significantly more complex in international markets. Of course, Luna said, but the potential impact could be enormous if you could develop scalable models for technology transfer and local manufacturing. Marcus stared at this 12-year-old who had just articulated a strategic vision that his business development team had been struggling to define for months. You should consider a career in sustainable business development alongside your environmental engineering interests. Luna grinned. I've been thinking about dual degree programs that would allow me to study both technical innovation and implementation strategy. As their tour concluded, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with impressing visitors or managing corporate presentations. Luna's engagement with his work felt like a gift, a reminder of why he'd started the company, and what he hoped to achieve through business success. Thank you for showing us this, Sarah said as they prepared to leave. It helps me understand what you meant when you talked about wanting to make work that matters. Marcus nodded. This is who I really am when I'm not trying to manage perceptions or protect myself from judgment. Someone who believes that business success should translate into positive environmental impact. Luna looked up at him with that penetrating, analytical gaze. Is this the person you were afraid we wouldn't like if we knew about your wealth and professional achievements? The question cut directly to the heart of Marcus's fears and insecurities. Yes, he said honestly. I was afraid that if you knew about my success, you'd see me as a symbol or an opportunity rather than as a person with genuine interests and values. Luna tilted her head thoughtfully. But your work is an extension of who you are as a person. Trying to separate your professional achievements from your character doesn't make sense when your achievements reflect your values and commitments. Once again, this remarkable child had identified a fundamental flaw in his thinking with surgical precision. Marcus realized that his attempts to compartmentalize his identity had prevented him from sharing the parts of his life that were most meaningful and authentic. "You're absolutely right," he said. "I was so focused on protecting myself from people who might be interested in my wealth that I forgot about the possibility of finding people who would appreciate my work for the right reasons." Sarah was watching this exchange with growing warmth in her expression. "I think we're all learning something important about authenticity and connection today." As they walked toward the parking area, Luna turned back to Marcus with a small smile. "Thank you for trusting us with the real version of yourself. It's much more interesting than the graphic designer story." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Thank you for giving me the chance to show you who I really am, both of you." Sarah paused beside her car. "Marcus, would you like to have dinner with us this week? At our house this time, so Luna can cook something and tell you about her food." Chemistry theories. The invitation felt like a gift beyond measure. "I would love that more than anything." "Thursday evening, if that works for your schedule?" Marcus thought about his calendar, packed with meetings and strategic planning sessions that had felt urgent just hours ago, but now seemed secondary to this opportunity for genuine connection. "Thursday evening would be perfect," he said. "Should I bring anything?" Luna's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Just an appetite for molecular gastronomy experiments and a willingness to discuss the scientific principles behind flavor development." Marcus laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I can't wait." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of Sarah's farmhouse, sleeves rolled up in flour, dusting his expensive watch as he attempted to follow Luna's precise instructions for creating what she called scientifically optimized chocolate chip cookies. The recipe involved calculations for butter temperature, flour protein content, and something called the optimal Maillard reaction zone that Luna explained with the enthusiasm of a researcher, presenting groundbreaking findings. "The key is understanding that baking is essentially controlled chemistry," Luna said, monitoring the oven temperature with digital precision. "Most people treat it like guesswork, but if you control the variables properly, you get consistent results every time." Marcus nodded seriously, though he suspected his technique for measuring brown sugar fell somewhat short of Luna's scientific standards. "I'm beginning to understand why you find cooking fascinating from a molecular perspective." Sarah watched from the kitchen table where she was grading papers from her nursing continuing education courses, occasionally glancing up to smile at the sight of a tech CEO receiving detailed lectures on protein structures from her 12-year-old daughter. The scene had become comfortably familiar over the months since their relationship had slowly, carefully rebuilt itself on a foundation of complete honesty. "Marcus, your sugar measurement is off by approximately 15%, Luna observed, studying his bowl with critical attention. "Precision matters in baking chemistry." "Yes, chef," Marcus said with mock seriousness, earning a giggle from Luna and an affectionate eye roll from Sarah. The easy domesticity of the moment struck Marcus as miraculous. 3 months ago, he'd been eating solitary dinners in his minimalist penthouse, checking emails between bites and treating meals as fuel rather than opportunities for connection. Now he found himself looking forward to Thursday evening dinners at Sarah's house, where Luna would explain her latest research discoveries, while Sarah shared stories from the hospital that reminded him why meaningful work mattered more than profitable work. The timer chimed, and Luna carefully removed the cookies from the oven with the reverence of a scientist handling precious specimens. "Perfect golden brown coloration," she announced. The Maillard reaction proceeded exactly as calculated. Marcus inhaled the warm sweetness filling the kitchen and felt something settle in his chest that he'd been missing for years without realizing it. This was what home felt like. Not the expensive furnishings and impressive views of his penthouse, but the lived-in warmth of a space where people genuinely cared about each other's daily experiences and celebrated small victories together. Luna. "These smell incredible," he said, accepting a still warm cookie. "Your scientific approach to baking is clearly superior to traditional methods." Luna beamed with pride. "I'm working on developing a comprehensive molecular gastronomy cookbook for teenagers interested in food science. Sarah thinks it might be publishable." Sarah looked up from her papers. "I think Luna underestimates how many adults would benefit from understanding the science behind cooking. Most of us are just winging it in the kitchen." Marcus bit into his cookie and made an exaggerated sound of appreciation that made Luna laugh. The truth was, it genuinely was the best chocolate chip cookie he'd ever tasted, but more importantly, sharing it felt like participating in something meaningful rather than simply consuming a product. "Speaking of scientific achievements," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from Sarah, "I have some news I wanted to share with both of you." Luna immediately perked up with interest. "Is it about the atmospheric processing pilot program?" "In Detroit?" Marcus grinned. Luna's continued fascination with Chen Technologies projects had become one of the unexpected joys of their developing relationship. She followed the company's progress with the enthusiasm of an investor and the analytical insight of a brilliant consultant. "Actually, it's about your MIT application," Marcus said, watching Luna's expression shift to focused attention. "I received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison in their environmental engineering department today." Sarah set down her papers completely, giving the conversation her full attention. Luna's early admission application to MIT had been submitted 2 months ago, along with Marcus's recommendation letter that had taken him days to write as he tried to capture the scope of her intellectual gifts and passionate commitment to environmental solutions. "They want to interview you," Marcus continued. "Dr. Morrison said your application materials were among the most impressive they've received from any applicant, regardless of age." Luna stared at him for a moment before her face broke into a smile that could have powered the entire house. "They want to interview me? Really?" "Really," Marcus confirmed. "Dr. Morrison specifically mentioned your research proposal on integrating atmospheric processing technology into urban infrastructure. She said it demonstrated graduate-level thinking about systemic environmental solutions." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached over to squeeze Luna's hand. "Sweetheart, this is incredible. I'm so proud of you." Luna looked between her mother and Marcus, her expression cycling through excitement, nervousness, and determination. "When is the interview scheduled?" "Next Friday at 2 o'clock. It'll be conducted virtually, so you can do it from home if you're more comfortable here." Luna nodded seriously. "I'll need to prepare extensively. There are probably gaps in my knowledge that I should address before speaking with Dr. Morrison." Marcus felt that familiar surge of admiration for Luna's intellectual humility despite her obvious brilliance. "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully. But if you'd like help preparing, I could arrange for you to speak with some of our engineers who are MIT graduates. They might have insights about what the faculty looks for in prospective students." "That would be helpful," Luna said thoughtfully. "Though I want to make sure I'm representing my own ideas and knowledge rather than just repeating things other people have taught me." Sarah was watching this exchange with an expression of grateful amazement. "Marcus, I can't thank you enough for the support you've provided for Luna's education. The recommendation letter, the research facility tours, now help with interview preparation. It means more than I can express." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Luna's gifts deserve every possible opportunity for development. Besides, helping her pursue her goals has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've had in years. Luna was studying him with that penetrating analytical gaze that had become so familiar and dear to him. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Before you met us, were you happy with your life? I mean, you had professional success and financial security. Was that enough?" The question cut directly to the heart of realizations Marcus had been processing over the past months. "I thought it was enough," he said carefully. "I'd convinced myself that meaningful work and business success were sufficient for a fulfilling life." He paused, looking around the warm kitchen with its mismatched chairs and Luna's science textbooks scattered on the counter. "But I wasn't happy. I was accomplished and financially secure, but I was also isolated and lonely in ways I didn't fully recognize until I experienced what genuine connection feels like." Sarah was listening with the focused attention she brought to important conversations. "What changed for you?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Meeting both of you made me realize that success without people who truly understand what you're trying to achieve feels hollow. All of my professional accomplishments felt incomplete because I didn't have anyone in my life who could appreciate them for the right reasons." Luna tilted her head thoughtfully. "So your wealth and status were actually barriers to connection, rather than advantages?" "Exactly," Marcus said. "I'd become so focused on protecting myself from people who might be interested in what I could provide for them that I'd forgotten about the possibility of finding people who would value what I was actually trying to accomplish." Sarah reached across the table to take his hand. "I'm glad you were brave enough to risk being vulnerable with us, even after your initial deception made everything more complicated." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, still amazed by her capacity for forgiveness and understanding. "I'm glad you were both generous enough to give me a second chance despite having every reason to walk away." Luna was quiet for a moment, her scientific mind clearly processing the emotional dynamics they were discussing. "I think authentic relationships require people to see each other as complete individuals rather than as sources of specific benefits." Once again, this remarkable 13-year-old had articulated a profound insight about human connection with characteristic clarity. "That's exactly right," Marcus said. "And it took meeting you and your mother to understand that I'd been approaching relationships from a defensive position that prevented genuine intimacy." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone buzzing with what he recognized as an urgent notification from his assistant. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "I'm sorry, but I need to take this call," he said apologetically. "It's about the Senate hearing on environmental regulation that I'm testifying at next week." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Of course. Luna and I can clean up the kitchen while you handle business." Marcus stepped onto the back porch to take the call. But through the window he could see Luna and Sarah working together to wash dishes and put away ingredients. The sight of their easy collaboration, the way they moved around each other with practiced familiarity, made him smile even as he discussed complex policy issues with his assistant. When he returned to the kitchen 20 minutes later, Luna and Sarah were sitting at the table with steaming mugs of tea, clearly engaged in one of their regular evening conversations about everything from Luna's coursework to Sarah's patients at the hospital. "Everything all right?" Sarah asked, looking up as he rejoined them. "Just coordination for next week's testimony," Marcus said, settling back into his chair. "The Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works wants me to discuss how private sector innovation can support federal environmental initiatives." Luna's eyes lit up with interest. "Are you going to talk about the atmospheric processing technology and your community partnership model?" "Among other things," Marcus confirmed. "The goal is to demonstrate how businesses can be genuine partners in addressing climate challenges rather than just sources of resistance to environmental regulation." Sarah was watching him with obvious pride. "It's amazing that you have the opportunity to influence policy at that level." Marcus felt a familiar sense of responsibility mixed with excitement about the platform his success had created. It's both an opportunity and an obligation. When you have resources and influence, using them for positive change becomes a moral imperative. Luna nodded approvingly. "Exactly what I'd expect from someone who structures their entire business model around environmental impact rather than just profit maximization." The easy way Luna discussed his work and values, as if his commitment to environmental responsibility was simply an obvious extension of his character, still amazed Marcus. She saw him as an integrated whole person rather than compartmentalizing his professional achievements from his personal identity. "Luna, can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Sure." "When you first figured out that I was lying about my identity, what made you decide to give me a chance to explain rather than just walking away?" Luna considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Because I could tell that your passion for sustainable technology was genuine, even when your story about being a graphic designer wasn't. I was curious about why someone would feel the need to hide achievements that aligned so clearly with values they obviously held." She paused, stirring her tea slowly. "Plus, I wanted to understand whether you were someone who could learn from mistakes and change their behavior, or someone who would just keep making the same defensive choices." Sarah smiled at her daughter. "Luna has always been more interested in people's capacity for growth than in judging their past mistakes." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as he contemplated the generosity of spirit that had made their relationship possible. "I'm grateful every day that you chose curiosity over judgment. Besides," Luna added with a mischievous grin, "anyone willing to listen to detailed explanations of molecular gastronomy principles while learning to bake scientifically optimized cookies clearly has excellent priorities." Marcus laughed, feeling that familiar warmth that filled his chest. Whenever Luna's brilliant analytical mind revealed itself through moments of playful humor, "I happen to think molecular gastronomy is fascinating." Sarah was watching their interaction with obvious affection. "You know, Marcus, I never imagined that Luna would find someone who genuinely appreciates her intellectual intensity rather than just tolerating it." The observation touched on something Marcus had been thinking about frequently over the past months. Luna's gifts were extraordinary, but they also made her different from other children in ways that could be isolating. Finding adults who engaged with her ideas seriously rather than dismissively was clearly important for her development. "Luna's insights challenge me to think more clearly about my own work," Marcus said. "Our conversations have influenced several business decisions over the past few months." Luna perked up with interest. "Really? Which ones?" Marcus grinned. "Remember when you suggested that we should consider international partnerships for atmospheric processing technology? That conversation led to our new collaboration with university researchers in Costa Rica and Kenya." Luna's eyes widened with excitement. "You're implementing the technology internationally?" "We're beginning pilot programs that will test scalability and cultural adaptation in different environmental contexts," Marcus confirmed. "Your point about technology transfer and local manufacturing was exactly the direction we needed to explore." Sarah was shaking her head in amazement. "My 13-year-old daughter is influencing international business strategy for a major technology company. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a science fiction novel." Marcus reached for Sarah's hand across the table. "You've raised someone remarkable." Luna's combination of intellectual brilliance and genuine concern for human welfare is exactly what the world needs more of. Luna blushed slightly at the praise. "I just ask questions about things that interest me. Marcus is the one actually implementing solutions at scale." "We make a good team," Marcus said warmly. "Complementary perspectives that strengthen each other's thinking." As evening settled around them, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave the warmth of Sarah's kitchen for his own empty penthouse. Over the months, this farmhouse had become more than just a place he visited. It had become the center of a life that felt richer and more meaningful than anything he'd experienced before. "Sarah," he said quietly, "could I talk to you about something?" Luna immediately stood up. "I'll go work on my MIT interview preparation and give you two some privacy." After Luna had disappeared upstairs with her textbooks, Sarah turned to Marcus with curious attention. "What's on your mind?" Marcus felt nervous in a way that reminded him of being 16 and asking someone to prom. "I've been thinking about our relationship, about how much my life has changed since I met you and Luna." Sarah's expression remained open but cautious. "It's been a significant change for all of us. I know we've been taking things slowly, rebuilding trust and learning to be authentic with each other," Marcus continued. "But I wanted you to know that what we've built together feels like the most important thing in my life." Sarah smiled softly. "It feels important to me too. Both of you have become essential parts of our world." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling as if he were standing at the edge of another cliff. "I love you, Sarah. And I love Luna. I love the life we're building together, the conversations over dinner, the way Luna challenges my thinking about everything from business strategy to cookie chemistry." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too, Marcus. And Luna adores you, though she'd probably express it in terms of statistical probability and shared intellectual interests." Marcus laughed, wiping his own eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less from her." Sarah reached for his hand. "You know, 6 months ago, if someone had told me that a tech CEO pretending to be broke would become the most important person in our lives, I would have thought they were describing a ridiculous romantic comedy." "Life is stranger than fiction," Marcus agreed, "but also more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." From upstairs, they could hear Luna practicing her interview responses, her voice carrying the confidence and enthusiasm that had first captivated Marcus in a cafe 6 months ago. The sound filled him with pride and hope for a future that included watching this remarkable young woman pursue her dreams with the support of people who understood her gifts. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, "I have something I want to ask you." "Two." He waited, giving her his complete attention. "Would you consider moving in with us? Not immediately, but when it feels right for everyone involved. This house feels more like home when you're here." Marcus felt his heart expand in his chest as he imagined waking up to Luna's scientific explanations over breakfast, coming home to Sarah's warm presence after challenging days at work, sharing the daily rhythms of a life built around genuine connection rather than professional achievement. "I would love that more than anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "as long as Luna is comfortable with the idea." "Are you kidding?" Sarah laughed. "She's already calculated the optimal bedroom arrangement to accommodate your books and her chemistry equipment." As if summoned by their conversation, Luna appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I couldn't help overhearing, and I wanted to say that having Marcus live here would significantly improve our household's intellectual discourse and culinary chemistry experiments." Marcus stood up and opened his arms, and Luna ran into them with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found exactly where she belonged. "I love you too, Luna," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for seeing through my terrible deception and giving me the chance to become part of your family." Luna pulled back to look at him with that penetrating, analytical gaze that had first exposed his lies and later revealed his authentic self. "Thank you for trusting us with who you really are. The real version is much better than the fake one." As they stood together in the warm kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of shared meals and ongoing projects, Marcus realized that his journey from isolated CEO to integral family member had taught him something profound about the nature of wealth. True abundance wasn't measured in bank accounts or stock portfolios, but in the depth of connections with people who saw and valued your authentic self. The scared, lonely man who had walked into a cafe 6 months ago wearing borrowed clothes and a false identity had been transformed by the generosity and wisdom of two remarkable people who'd chosen love over judgment, curiosity over condemnation, and hope over cynicism. And as Luna began explaining her latest theories about optimizing family dinner preparation through systematic meal planning, Marcus knew that he'd finally found the success that mattered most: a life built on truth, connection, and the daily miracle of being genuinely known and loved. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.